There is a kind of silence that does not feel empty at all. It feels loud. It hums in your chest at 3 in the morning. It sits beside you when your phone doesn't light up. It follows you into the shower, into your workday, into the quiet moment before sleep when your mind asks the same question, again and again, with a different tone each time. If they cared, how can they be this quiet? If it meant something, how can they disappear this completely? How can someone hold you so close one moment, then become unreachable the next, as if the whole connection slipped beneath frozen water and never came back up? And the cruelest part is not just the silence itself. It is what the silence makes you do. It makes you replay old messages like they contain hidden code. It makes you inspect your last conversation like a crime scene. It makes you wonder whether you loved too hard, asked for too much, felt too deeply, or simply believed in something that was never real. Their absence becomes a mirror, and somehow you end up seeing your own face as the problem. But here is the brutal truth most people do not want to hear when an avoidant ex goes quiet. The more you chase clarity from someone who is wired to run from emotional intensity, the more you accidentally confirm their deepest fear about closeness. Not because you are wrong for wanting answers, not because your love was too much, but because to a nervous system trained to associate intimacy with pressure, your pursuit does not feel like devotion. It feels like danger. That is the part that breaks people. Because your heart says, if I explain myself one more time, they'll understand. If I send one more message, they'll remember. If I show them how deeply I care, maybe they'll stop acting like I'm easy to lose. But avoidant attachment does not process love the way secure love does. It often does not even process pain the way pain is supposed to be processed. It converts tenderness into tension. It translates need into threat. It takes warmth and, under pressure, experiences it as heat. So while you are sitting there interpreting their distance as proof they never cared, they may be fighting a battle you cannot see. A battle that does not look romantic. A battle that does not look poetic. A battle inside the body. Because when emotional closeness gets too intense for an avoidant person, the brain does not calmly say, I need a little space. It reacts much faster than language. The amygdala, the part of the brain that scans for threat, can light up before they have words for what they feel. Their nervous system begins reading intimacy the same way another person might read chaos. Cortisol rises. Their body becomes alert. Their chest tightens. Their thoughts speed up or go numb. And instead of leaning in and naming that overwhelm, they do what once kept them safe. They detach. They delay. They withdraw. They go quiet. Not because nothing was there, because too much was there. That is what most people miss. They think indifference created the distance. Sometimes it did, but often, especially with avoidant attachment, the distance was created by emotional overload, by the unbearable weight of being affected, by the discomfort of needing someone and not knowing how to survive that need without feeling swallowed by it. So no, they did not necessarily stop caring. They may have felt too much, too fast, in a system built to shut down when closeness begins to matter. And if you have been taking their silence personally, if you have been translating it into a verdict on your worth, I need you to hear this at a deeper level than logic. Their withdrawal is not always a measurement of your value. Sometimes it is a measurement of their capacity. Sometimes it is the edge of what their system can tolerate before it defaults to escape. That does not excuse the pain they caused. It does not make mixed signals noble. It does not turn emotional unavailability into romance. But it does explain why someone can miss you and avoid you at the same time. Why they can think about you and still not reach out. Why they can care and still choose distance. Contradiction is not confusing to an avoidant nervous system. Contradiction is home. And this is where your power begins to return. Because once you understand what their silence really is, you stop trying to fight it with more noise. Silence. That is the core concept. Not passive aggression, not manipulation, not icy performance. Real silence. The kind that is grounded, clean, and non-reactive. The kind that does not beg to be interpreted. The kind that does not secretly ask, "Do you miss me yet?" The kind that no longer leaks desperation between the lines. Because the silence they are fighting inside themselves is one thing. The silence you choose is another. Theirs is usually a defense. Yours becomes a boundary. And boundaries change the emotional climate completely. When you keep reaching, explaining, reminding, hoping, you stay emotionally available in a way that costs you your center. You become easy to feel without being respected, easy to access without being chosen. Your energy remains open, and somewhere deep inside, they know it. Even if they never admit it, they feel the invisible cushion beneath them. They sense that you are still there, still emotionally orbiting, still carrying the connection for both of you. That comforts them. It does not awaken them. But the moment your silence becomes real, something shifts. Not always immediately, not theatrically, but deeply. Because now, the familiar emotional arrangement begins to collapse. The background certainty that you will still be there starts to disappear. And an avoidant person can ignore emotions for a long time. What they struggle to ignore is absence. Not dramatic absence, energetic absence. The kind where they can no longer feel your pull on the line. At first, they may feel relief. That is important to understand. Relief. Space. A temporary drop in pressure. Their nervous system unclenches. They tell themselves, "This is better, cleaner, easier." They distract. They stay busy. They act normal. Maybe too normal. Maybe they post more. Maybe they seem lighter, almost unaffected. And if you are watching from the outside, this can destroy you, because it looks like your pain barely touched them. But avoidant suppression is not peace. It is postponement. What gets buried in the body does not vanish. It waits. So days pass, then more days, and something strange begins to happen inside them. The relief loses its shine. The quiet becomes less soothing and more revealing. Without your messages, without your emotion, without your steady pursuit, there is suddenly more room for what they were outrunning to surface. Memory starts slipping through the cracks. Not the conflict first, the feeling. Your laugh in the car, the softness after the argument, the way you looked at them when they could not look at themselves, the safety they never fully knew how to receive. And now there is no immediate stimulus to push against, no pressure to resist, No emotional demand to numb out from. Just absence. Just the echo of what used to be available. This is when the silent battle often intensifies. Because missing someone is one thing. Missing someone you trained yourself not to need is another. That creates friction inside the psyche. One part of them wants to dismiss the feeling. Another part keeps circling back. Dopamine, the brain's motivation and reward chemical, gets involved in a way people rarely talk about. What was once available and emotionally charged becomes unavailable. The brain notices that. The uncertainty itself creates preoccupation. What is distant becomes mentally sticky. What is no longer guaranteed becomes strangely magnetic. So they think about you at odd times. In the grocery store, in traffic, while watching something meaningless late at night. Your name may not be on their screen, but it is in their nervous system. And that is harder to escape. They may start checking indirectly, looking at your page, revisiting old photos, reading old messages they once ignored, not because they have become fully transformed, not because they are suddenly ready, but because your absence is finally making them feel what your presence used to protect them from. Loss. Not the dramatic kind they would confess to their friends, the private kind. The kind that looks like agitation, restlessness, a mood they cannot explain, a strange irritation when they imagine you moving on. That is the part few people understand. Avoidant people often do not feel the breakup in a clean, immediate wave. They feel it in fragments, in delayed body memories, in moments of emotional leakage, in subtle panic disguised as numbness, in curiosity disguised as indifference, in ego wounds disguised as freedom. And if you break your silence too early, you interrupt that process. This matters more than you think, because the moment you rush back in to soothe your own discomfort, you rescue them from the consequences of distance. You step back into the role of emotional regulator. You lower the tension that might have forced them to confront themselves. You give them access to your warmth without requiring them to cross the bridge toward growth. And the pattern resets. Again. This is why so many people stay trapped in cycles with avoidant exes. Not because the connection was imaginary, not because the feelings were fake, but because every time the avoidant person begins to feel the true cost of disconnection, the anxious or heartbroken person reopens the door before the lesson lands. Then everyone calls it fate. It is not fate. It is reinforcement. And once you see that, your silence stops being a tactic to get them back and becomes a refusal to keep participating in your own abandonment. Imagine them on a random night, their phone in their hand, your chat thread somewhere below the recent conversations. They pause for half a second too long. They tell themselves not to open it. They open it anyway. They scroll. They reread something small you probably forgot you ever said. Something tender. Something human. And suddenly, the version of you they kept reducing in their head becomes real again. Not as a concept, as a person. A person they affected. A person who is no longer speaking. A person who may finally be gone. That moment can unsettle them more than any long paragraph ever could. Because paragraphs can be defended against. Silence cannot. Silence leaves them alone with themselves, and that is where the battle lives. They may want to reach out, but pride gets involved, fear gets involved, shame gets involved. If they contact you, they risk feeling exposed. They risk being rejected. They risk having to admit they were affected after all. They risk facing the emotional reality they spent so much energy avoiding. So instead, they hover, delay, rationalize. Maybe they send something casual. Maybe they watch from a distance. Maybe they disappear longer than makes sense. Do not mistake delay for peace. Sometimes delay is internal war. But now listen carefully, because this is where people sabotage everything. The second they sense the avoidant ex feeling something, they get excited. They rush to interpret breadcrumbs as transformation. One late-night message becomes hope. One view, one like, one vague check-in becomes proof that the story is changing. And maybe it is. But not enough. Not yet. Feeling loss is not the same as building capacity. Missing you is not the same as being able to love you well. That distinction will save your life. Because if you confuse longing with readiness, you will walk right back into the same emotional architecture that broke you. And then the old chemistry returns. The dopamine hit of contact. The relief of being seen. The body rush that says, finally. But if nothing fundamental has changed in how they handle closeness, vulnerability, accountability, and repair, the cycle will reopen with new language and the same ending. Intimacy, fear, distance, confusion, silence, collapse. So yes, your avoidant ex may be fighting a silent battle right now. They may be thinking of you more than they show. They may be more overwhelmed than detached. They may be losing sleep in ways they would never admit. They may be struggling with the emptiness they created. All of that can be true. And still, your job is not to rescue them from that battle. Your job is not to translate their wounds into excuses until you disappear inside the translation. Your job is not to become so psychologically generous that you abandon your own reality. Understanding them is not the same as waiting for them. Loving someone is not the same as volunteering to be emotionally injured by their limitations. Compassion without boundaries becomes self-betrayal. Read that again in your body. Because the real shift happens when you stop asking, how do I make them feel my absence? And start asking, why was I willing to beg for presence from someone who only recognized my value when I went quiet? That question changes everything. Now the story is no longer about decoding them. It is about reclaiming yourself. It is about noticing how you were trained to confuse intensity with intimacy. How unpredictability made you cling harder. How your nervous system started treating inconsistency like romance because the intermittent reward kept you addicted to possibility. Dopamine does that. It bonds you to uncertainty. It makes the almost feel unforgettable. But almost love is not deeper because it hurts more. It just leaves a deeper bruise. And healing begins when you stop calling the bruise a soulmate. You do not need to become cold. You do not need to become unreachable. You do not need to perform strength while secretly bleeding for their validation. Real power is quieter than that. Real power is when your silence is no longer a strategy. It is a consequence of your self-respect. It is when you no longer offer your mind as a home to someone who was careless with your heart. It is when you accept that being missed is not the same as being met. That is the identity shift. You are not the person waiting in emotional suspension anymore. You are not the one over-explaining your worth. You are not the one interpreting scraps and calling it hope. You are not the emergency exit for someone afraid of their own feelings. You are the one who finally understands that your softness was never the problem. Your depth was never the problem. Your desire for closeness was never the problem. The problem was giving sacred access to someone who wanted the comfort of connection without the responsibility of holding it. And once that truth lands, deeply, you change. Not loudly, completely. You stop chasing closure from closed people. You stop auditioning for love that should know your name by now. You stop shrinking your needs so someone else can avoid confronting theirs. And something almost unsettling happens after that. The energy reverses. Whether they come back or not, whether they text or hover or finally say the words they swallowed, you are no longer standing in the same place. You are no longer living at the mercy of their timing. You are no longer hypnotized by their distance. The power dynamic shifts because your center is no longer located inside their response. That is freedom. Not getting them back, getting yourself back. So, if they are fighting a silent battle right now, let them. Let the silence speak in the language they understand. Let absence do what explanations could not. Let them meet the weight of what they lost without cushioning it for them. And while they are somewhere wrestling with memory, tension, fear, and delayed grief, you do something even more important. You return to yourself. You become unavailable for half love, unavailable for confusion, unavailable for emotional starvation dressed up as complexity. You become the person who can feel deeply without kneeling to be chosen. And that is when the story truly ends, or truly begins. Because the moment you stop needing their awakening to validate your worth is the moment your worth becomes untouchable. They may miss you. They may chase. They may finally understand. But by then, the deepest victory is this. You no longer need someone else's nervous system to make peace with your existence. You already have.